So it's time for another Dungeon Meshi, I guess like spin-off fan art type of thing. A while ago, I did basically another mythical creature as a food dish, both for it to help me to practice rendering food, and then I just love Delicious in Dungeon. It's like one of my favorite anime. The world building, the lore crafting, the food, it's amazing. And it's what I really want to do with my comic. So I love doing little odes to a series that's very inspiring for me. And so today I'm doing a mythical creature that hasn't been used in the series and making a dish for it. So primarily when I've looked through like the wiki of all the different monsters that have been featured, a lot of them are from like a combination of like Asian European descent from what I've seen, which makes some of like the gut impulse ones already taken, like, I don't know, like unicorn or griffin or hippogriff, all those different ones the amazing creator has already covered and made awesome dishes for, so I have to branch out further and find some different ones that maybe haven't been used. So I was researching quite a few different ones, and one that popped into my mind was a Kirin. Within Dungeon Meshi, they already have a unicorn, and then they have a bicorn as well, which I feel is like Kirin adjacent, depending on which Kirin render that you see because of the two horns. But I thought we'd go full Kirin and do like a totally different design from any of the horses that are currently in Delicious in Dungeon. So with that, let's jump into rendering out a Kirin and designing a dish that will go with this beast. I'll tell you a little about my inspiration and the real life origin of the dish, and we'll jump right into it. All right, let's start with our render of our creature first, and then I'll jump in and tell you guys a little bit more about the dish and my thought process on it. But first of all, it's a Kirin, as I already covered. Basically, Kirins are like a combination of a creature, and depending on the rendering, there's a creature that is more primarily featured than the other. It's kind of like, if you ask me, it's like a dragon, horse, fish, mythical creature. It's kind of a combo of all of that. So I think the flavor of this creature would be very varied depending on, I guess, the primary creature. So at least for mine, I wanted the creature to be primarily horse-like, like I said earlier in the video. I didn't want it to be too reptilian, since that's kind of what we did last time. And I personally like a good like horse-based Kirin. I love when they're like more dragon-esque as well. But I was like, I want to go for like a very horse adjacent creature. It's almost like, this one is almost like a deer horse, if you ask me, at least how I rendered it. So I got the sketch figured out, and then it was time to jump into the dish. So the dish that I'm basing this off of is actually a Malta-based dish. I was doing research. I was looking up different food around the world that features horse as the primary meat source. So when I was Googling that, I was like, oh, I know, like, I had horse when I was in Japan, so I know a couple of ways that it was cooked there, but I'm like, I want to do something a little bit different, or maybe from a culture that I don't know as much about, and I wanted to experiment, like, with new and different cultural foods, and I'm going to try my best to pronounce it. I YouTube Googled how to pronounce it. It's called lahanta ziamel. Basically, it is a stewed meat. It's not primarily always horse, but it looks like historically it has been horse in the past. A lot of people use beef now, but it's basically just a deliciously stewed meat, primarily with like a red wine and tomato base to it. But depending on how you make it, it looks like some people add like onion and garlic and even some lemon and orange peel. You have a lot of different seasonings like bay leaves and paprika and fennel. It just depends on which recipe you find. So I kind of combined the flavors of different recipes that I found, as well as ones that I think would jive really well just based off of my cooking experience. So I prepped this plate with some sides that were mentioned that are commonly served with this dish. Keep in mind, I of course have not had the pleasure of trying this meal for myself, but at least from the Google search, it looks like quite a few people serve it with a side of roasted potatoes or some beautifully baked bread. Some people mention specifically sourdough bread. And so I wanted to add the side dishes as well for this one. And we also know that bread is a coveted thing in the dungeon. Not many people can have fresh baked bread down in the dungeon. So I'm like, this would be such a perfect little treat to go with a plate of deliciously stewed meat. And so I started with rendering the bread at first. I thought that would be the easiest thing to tackle, but I realized like it's been a while since I have rendered bread. Like I previously did it on my iPad for the Fox Among Hounds food, and I completely forgot all the brushes I used. So it was a little bit of a struggle at first to figure out exactly how I wanted to render it, especially with new brushes. But I think I got into a place that I really liked, so then it was time to go into the stewed meat and potatoes. I wanted the potatoes to look very well roasted and pretty and delicious. And I really love how they turned out. This one, it took a little while to get in the groove of remembering how to like render and look at my reference and render the food. But I think the potatoes were a good place to start before we jumped into rendering the more harder meat part of the dish. So now onto the stew. So I was looking at a direct image of like a couple of different presentations of both the direct dish and some other beef stews that have like a red wine base. And I was like, okay, there's quite a good gleam that comes off some of the meat and the sauce. So I wanted to make sure I had the correct highlights and shadows. And so I just started more like penciling those in first so that I could get a good grasp of where my light source was coming from. And then I wanted to go through and add a little bit more texture and differentiation to the sauce and the meat. I didn't want it to all look like just one flat thing of brown, because if you look at the sauces, there's usually like maybe a little bit of like fat droplets that add a totally different sheen to it, like usually in a more like tannish, like red sometimes, especially with these tomato-based soups. And I wanted that to also be present on like the meat as well, since they're not just going to be plain chunks of brown. I wanted them to have some differentiation and make sure that they looked at least pretty scrumptious. And then from there, I did some coloring on the line work, so then it's not just black line art. I've been trying to do that more frequently with my drawings because I feel it just adds so much more dimension and life to it when it's not just plain black line art. I forget sometimes because I'm just so used to doing, you know, the traditional like cartooning line art, but I think it adds so much to the look. And then I decorated the plate a little bit, and then it was time to jump in and add the shading. Now that I knew where my light source was coming from, I go back and do basically my usual way of shading, which is adding a multiply layer with like either a purple or red color. And this is like kind of like the bridging of styles of me rendering, I guess, meat and food, but it also kind of bridges my style with my traditional way of shading and highlighting. And it's funny because I think I worked backwards with this one, because last time I think I did the Hydra first and then the food. So this time I did the food and then the beast, which I think I'm going to count as a little bit of character growth, because I used to be afraid of doing the food. So I'm like, I'll do the monster and get that done. And, you know, that will be the easy thing for me to get out of the way first. But this time I was like, no, let's just get into the food. I'm ready to draw it. I'm ready to paint it. Let's jump right into it. And I started with that. So I don't know if that's the reasoning, or maybe I did want to get it out of the way faster. But I guess it was nice to kind of see that I just jumped into that first. So I wanted this Kirin to be more in like the blue and green range. I love seeing more of like a cool colors Kirin. There's so many diverse different colors to them depending on like the artist, and like, I mean, even like the Kirin like label for the beer company is more in like the blacks and golds and reds. But I thought the blues and the greens would be really stunning for the creature. And it also looks really nice next to the nice yellows and brighter colors of the dish, which was totally unintentional. So I really love how this turned out. The bright mane and the blues and the greens. It was just really fun to create this creature. And I love Kirins, and I don't draw them enough. I think they're really gorgeous creatures. And so I'm glad that I was able to do one for a video. So then it was time to just get stuck in, finish up the rest of the highlights and the shadows for the Kirin, and then I'll jump back in and tell you guys a little bit about the menu card, I guess is what you call it, or the recipe card. So for the recipe card, I combined a couple of recipes that I did find for this dish. It kind of seems to have generally the same base things of the meat, red wine, tomatoes, and onions, and then it just kind of depends on dealer's choice. I saw some people put apple in theirs for flavoring, some carrots, and then for the seasonings, there was consistently herbs, salt, pepper, and paprika, but I love the idea of adding the cinnamon and brown sugar for kind of a sweet, savory combo. So there is our finished delicious and dungeon or dungeon meshi dish of a Kirin. I thought this was really fun to do. I've been really enjoying painting food. Now that I've done it quite a few times, I'm really starting to jive with it. Now I got to figure out a way to make backgrounds this fun because I used to hate food. Now I like food. Now I need to find a way to make backgrounds just as fun. I had a lot of fun designing this creature and dish combo and doing a lot of research on different horse dishes from around the world and seeing which one could fit well with this. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments if there's another mythical creature you want to see me dungeon foodify, because I love doing this series and it keeps me fresh on rendering food and trying new different foods to render. I want to do a shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. If you guys want to get early access and behind the scenes look at some artwork I'm working on, as well as comic pages, we also have a mail club where you get like prints and stickers in the mail every month. Go check out my Patreon. Patrons and subscribers and members here on YouTube are making this business a thing. Like, it's helping support me try to make this full-time art thing work. So I appreciate any support you can offer. Like, shares, comments, subscribes, it all helps. So I super appreciate your guys' support. But either way, thank you guys again so much for stopping by and checking out this video. Again, if you have a mythical creature you want to see me foodify, or if you have like maybe some cool other creature from like way outside of like regular lore, let me know in the comments below. I probably won't do human creatures, just like Marcel is in the show. I'm like, I don't want to touch eating human creatures. So keep that in mind in your suggestions. But either way, thanks again so much for stopping by, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.